So you may or may not have heard, but in the new update coming on April 12th for Back 4 Blood, there's going to be this new legendary looking hammer that has shotgun pellets attached to the end of it, meaning Holly players are going to have a grand old time. So in honor or in anticipation for this brand new hammer that's coming to Back 4 Blood, I wanted to talk about melee and melee weapons, because honestly the last time I did, the game wasn't even out yet. So what we're going to do today is focus in a lot about why we do what we do with melee, a lot of the mechanism behind things and how they work. Because I sincerely believe that if you understand how things work and why we do what we do, it's going to completely open up your creativity and you're going to have a lot more fun with melee during your time in Back 4 Blood. Okay, so we're going to start with the deck here. And again, the whole point of what I want to do today is explain why things work the way they do and what you should be paying attention to. Because in my opinion, decks are completely subjective. They are meant to augment your play style, being your play style, not mine, not someone else's. You make it how you want to make it. So this here is mainly a list of talking points. One of the things I want to start off with right away is the combat knife, because it's gotten a lot of love ever since it came out. It used to be one of those weapons where you're like, okay, it's like the noob weapon. People use it when they don't know what they're doing. That's not the case anymore. It's definitely gotten some love. So let's talk about some of the pros of the combat knife here and what can really make it special. So the combat knife is really special in a lot of different ways. Actually, one thing that's really interesting about the combat knife, in case you didn't know, is if you drop both your weapons, you default with your combat knife out. It goes ahead and lets you use your left click to go ahead and stab things rather than having to use your melee button. But we're going to go ahead and keep these two weapons attached, and then right away we're going to take a peek at something here. So if I open up the door here and I come over here and start swinging, what you'll see is I'm doing damage to the team, because that's how friendly fire works. However, for some reason, when you are using a combat knife, you can see I can just stab away at Hoffman here and he's not losing any health, which is actually a really big benefit, because it allows you to be a lot more reckless with your movement when you are using the combat knife. Because if I got a bunch of stuff going on here, I'm swinging around at stuff and my teammates happen to be nearby them, that can get really dangerous, especially if you have something like a fire axe that does a lot of damage. So being able to do this and not having to worry about it is a really big deal. So now let's talk about the other awesome part about the combat knife. So if you go ahead and you take a look here, I have my bat, and if I swing my bat at this Ridden, you'll see I hit for 15 a schmuck, right? Now, if you go ahead and take a look at the combat knife, what it does is it right away introduces you to a melee weapon that can do 40 damage, which is so useful for so many different reasons, and let's start to break that down a little bit. So what is so significant about 40 damage? Why is that a big deal? Because if you go ahead and take a look at statty.net here, one of the things you'll see when you take a look at the common is their HP values. And a regular common has 20 HP. A ferocious common has 25, and a monstrous common has 30. So, as you may be able to figure out really quickly, you are getting yourself a weapon right away at the beginning of the game that can take out the strongest common in one hit. And that is huge and extremely significant when you consider stamina management. Because if you go ahead and you take a look at the damage numbers here on a lot of the weapons, let's go zoom into the bottom where the melee hangs out. What you'll see is the stamina usage on each one of these weapons. You'll see that the bat uses 15 stamina. You'll see that the hatchet uses 10 per swing. The fire axe uses 20. Bash uses 10. And then the combat knife is also sitting here at 10. So from the perspective of the amount of damage you're getting for the amount of stamina you're producing at a gray variant, again, a starter variant, there's nothing in the game that even comes close. And then I can already hear somebody going, well, if you take a look at the hatchet, it's actually the same exact numbers when it's gray. Yeah, but good luck finding a hatchet. Because you can start with a bat, you could start with a machete if you're on Evangelo, but there ain't nobody on the dang team that could start with a hatchet, and you can't dusty in a hatchet either. So you're sitting there kind of playing weapon roulette, hoping that you were to find a hatchet. And now you might be wondering, well, okay, I guess, what, the hatchet uses 10 stamina, the combat knife uses 10, fire axe is, what you said, 20, bat's 15, why, okay, all these numbers, why do I care? Let's talk about why 10 stamina really matters in the land of melee, especially on a character here like Holly. So if I go ahead and I go into tab here and click cleaners, and what you'll see is on Holly's character card here, I'll move myself out of the way, is it says Holly recovers 10 stamina when she kills a Ridden. Now, by the way, that's when she kills a Ridden. It doesn't just have to be when she uses a melee weapon. So if she throws a grenade and kills a bunch of Ridden, she's going to get a bunch of stam. Anyway, what you'll notice here is Holly recovers 10 stamina when she kills a Ridden. So what does that mean? That means if you're using a weapon that uses 10 stamina, then if you kill something, you are going ahead and replacing the amount of stamina you just used up, which is huge when you think of how you want to manage your stamina and make it so you can keep stabbing things and not run out. Because when you run out of stamina, one big thing happens. Actually, a couple big things happen, but let's talk about the biggest one. So, like we said before, the hatchet and the combat knife are actually pretty similar when you have a gray hatchet. So let's take a peek here. If I go ahead and I hit this bad boy here, you'll see I do 40 damage because, again, very similar. And I also used up about 10 stamina. By the way, each one of these little bars on your stamina is 25 stamina. All right, you start with 100 stamina. Holly actually starts with more, but you have 100 stamina. Each bar is 25. And as the bars get smaller and shrink, that's just to make it so it all fits. They're all still 25 a chunk. So what you'll see here is I'm using up my stamina. And when we go ahead and we reach the point where stamina runs out, you'll see the number here changes. So not only do I start swinging slower, but we have a huge damage increase. And I think something that people might not know is how much is that damage increase. What you'll see is it's 14 out of 40. So that's 35%. How do we work around this 35% here? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But what you need to know is that your damage drops all the way down to 35% of its previous efficacy. But again, before we get too into that, let's once again talk about why that 10 stamina matters. Because when we go finally back to the deck here, what you'll see is we have a card right away, which I'm assuming most of you are familiar with if you're into melee, called Meth Head. And what Meth Head does is it increases your melee attack speed, which is really nice, especially with the combat knife. The combat knife has an incredible attack speed, but it also increases your melee stamina efficiency. So in theory, what this means is if you have 10 stamina that you use up every time you swing, well, if you are 30% more efficient, that goes down to a 7. So this buys you a little bit of wiggle room where if every single stab you do isn't one that kills a ridden, well, now you can go ahead and have a little bit of a buffer to take care of that. That extra 3 stamina that you save really does add up. So now let's dive a little bit deeper into each one of these melee weapons and talk about what they're specifically good at, because each one of them has a specialty. So let's start with the bat here. If you go ahead and take a look, it says it has 40 firepower, a 2-meter range, and 90 mobility. So what these numbers mean is absolutely nothing, and you can ignore all of them. It's all made up and it's completely confusing. I'm sorry if you've ever been misled by these, okay? Let's talk about what's actually going on here. We're gonna go ahead and take a look at statty.net here. And by the way, Statty, if you ever see this website here is one of the best things to happen to this community. And honestly, I think you deserve more kudos than you get. Statty.net is an incredible resource if you want to learn a lot more about this game. I reference it all the time because it's a work of art. So let's go ahead and take a look at the bat here. So as you'll see, the bat actually has a 2.5 meter range, or I guess 2.4 technically. And there's nothing about 40 firepower going on here. Instead, the gray bat has a swing damage of 15. But then, okay, 40 firepower, where are they pulling that out of? My presumption is that it's a aggregate of a bunch of different things that they find valuable as stats. So that could be swing speed, that could also be something like stumble. And this is what the bat is really particularly good at. Every single weapon in the game has a stumble value, and basically what it is its capacity to smack a ridden and then make it go, huh? And that's not only regular ridden, but that's also specialty ridden, like the wretches, the stingers, the tall boys. Each weapon has its own capacity to do this, and the bat is the best at it in terms of the melee weapons. Another good thing to know about the bat is that it does have a cleave, and it's really easy to see this just by the way you swing with the thing. So it goes side to side like this, and the reason why that's significant is it's really useful when you're trying to clear multiple zombies at a time. Also, it swings lower by doing that, because if you go ahead and take a look at something like the hatchet or the fire axe, what you'll see is they swing over the top, so that can get really hard to deal with on something like a volatile ridden. This gives you a little bit more capacity to aim low in those scenarios. And now let's talk about the machete here, and you'll see the firepower is 46. Again, I don't know what this means. But now, to be fair, the range of 2 meters is actually accurate on the machete here. And the reason why this 2.5 meter range versus 2 meter range thing is a big deal is because in the past, I'll give you a little bit of history lesson here. In the past, if you take a look at Face Your Fears here, it says gain 2 temporary health whenever you kill a ridden within 2.5 meters. This used to be 2 meters. So there were these weird scenarios where the bat and the fire axe weren't actually making Face Your Fears proc because you were hitting things outside of a 2 meter range. You're hitting like a 2.4 meter range. So now that Face Your Fears has changed, it's a little bit more irrelevant, but you can still get a little bit of value out of the longer range of the bat and the fire axe and things such as blighted exploding around you or charred ridden, trying to keep your distance from them. But now let's talk about the machete here. So very similar to the bat, it has that cleave. It also does a little bit more damage per level. If you go ahead and take a look at the gray variant here, it starts at 18 rather than 15. And also, very importantly, it has 10 stamina per swing. Again, the bat was a 15 and the machete's a 10. So there's a lot of value here simply because it has a low stamina requirement. It doesn't use up a card like combat knife does. And it does a little bit more damage. So once you start getting yourself to green machete, blue machete, you're in a really good spot. And so now let's talk about the hatchet here, because the hatchet's really interesting. So if you go ahead and take a look at the hatchet, what it does is about 40 damage, and it's about 10 damage per swing. We kind of talked about this earlier in the video, right? But something unique about the hatchet that I don't think a lot of people really pay attention to is it is the fastest movement speed melee weapon in the game. If you ever try to pay attention here, you will move much faster with a hatchet than you will with any of the rest of them. And this gets really obvious when you start stacking things like, let's go to our decks here. This is extremely useful if you go ahead and take a look at Hellfire, right? Because move speed while firing does affect the melee weapons. So if you have something like Hellfire on and then also heavy attack where you can actually charge the weapon up, you'll notice that you move really, really quickly with the hatchet. I think I've talked about this in videos before. And what's really cool about the hatchet is that it actually kind of when you're using heavy attack and Hellfire together, you kind of do one of these weird ninja type things. So this is definitely the ninja's weapon of the Back 4 Blood universe. So if you have a lot of value in movement speed, I would consider the hatchet. And again, to confirm this, you can even go ahead and take a look at Stata here and these side numbers here. Move speed, jog. And the hatchet here has a 441, the bat has a 410, the machete has a 425. And again, the higher the number, the faster you are. And then the fire axe has a 395. So to confirm, the hatchet has the highest move speed by a lot. And then finally, let's talk about the fire axe. What the fire axe does is it hits real good. It hits real strong. And who knows, maybe Charisse is going to start with one since she's a firefighter. If you go ahead and take a peek here, we have 70 damage on a swing from a fire axe. So if you think of all the other weapons, what was 15 on a bat, 18 on a machete, 40 on a hatchet. Nothing even comes close, though, to the 70, again, on a gray fire axe. These numbers only go up. But again, it does come at an increased cost of stamina, and you swing overhead, which typically is not a good thing. All right, so now finally back to the deck here, and we can really start making a lot more sense of the decision-making behind some of this stuff now that we understand it a lot better. So we had combat knife and meth head. We talked about those already. Now let's talk about Berserker. So Berserker, I kind of slept on Berserker for a while. I loved it when the game first came out, and then I fell off of it, and I've really grown a new appreciation for it for the reasons that we're about to talk about. So you gain 10 melee damage, you gain 10 melee speed, and you gain 5 move speed for each melee kill in the last 4 seconds. So what this can turn into is you start going like this, you're stabbing with the combat knife, and then suddenly you're like, and you're just killing everything. But that's not really why I care about Berserker. It's not the take down everything kind of vibe of it. It is the save my butt when I run out of stamina vibe of it. So what's really interesting here, again, is you gain 10% melee damage. Why is that significant? Back to this 35% thing that I kept bringing up earlier. So if you go ahead and take a look at your hatchet, right? Because this is going to be our pseudo combat knife. If you go ahead and take a look here, once we run out of stam, you start hitting for 14, right? Which really sucks. So now let's go ahead and try to bring this full circle. You just saw this 14 damage here. Now, how is that significant with Berserker? So if you gain 10% melee damage, okay, well, if you go ahead and you take, what, 14, and you add 10% to that, what is that going to get you? So go ahead and take out the calculator here. 14 times 1.1, what you'll get is 15.4. And what this does is it puts you within this threshold to start taking everything out again. So what you can do is multiply that by 2 if you hit them in the head, and what you'll see is you're getting 30.8. And you know how we talked earlier about how the Ridden have 30 health when they're monstrous on Nightmare mode? Which is, again, that's what you want to be able to plan around, is 30 health on the monstrous Ridden, because you can get monstrous basically right away in the game. So immediately you're at a point just with Berserker where you're able to start one-shotting things, even if you are completely out of stamina. So this completely changes the game when you are considering your stamina management. You don't need to be sitting here, well, maybe I need cross trainers, or maybe I need to run Brazen, or maybe I need to run something that just gives me more stamina. Suddenly, Berserker takes care of all of that for you. But now let's make it a little bit better though, because hitting things in the head isn't always ideal. That can be something that's kind of bad. Right? Because sometimes you run into volatile Ridden, which sucks. So let's come up with a better solution than the combat knife sitting here trying to stab things in the head. So if you take a look at the fire axe here again, let's talk about what the fire axe was good at. It has really decent range compared to some of the other weapons, right? It has that 2.4 meter range. Also, it hits really hard. So if I come over here and I start exhausting myself here, and once I am completely out of stamina, we go down to, take a peek, 24.5 damage. Okay? And if we take a look at the deck here, we can very quickly make this a really interesting number. So to the deck, new Holly, and we have that Berserker that we could pay attention to, right? So that is 10% melee damage per swing. And again, just we're focusing on the idea of just killing one common. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stacks of Berserker here, so your damage is going through the roof. But if we go ahead and we take Spiky Bits, which is a really good thing to pick early because not only does it give you damage resistance, it also gives you a little bit more melee damage. So let's imagine the scenario where we have Berserker on, Spiky Bits, and then we had found ourselves just a Gray Fire Axe. Green Fire Axe makes this all irrelevant, but those two cards with the Gray Fire Axe, we're going to put you into a position where you can have what? Let's go ahead and take a look at the calculator here. We have 24.5, and then we multiply that by what? 1.3? I'm not sure if Berserker and Spiky Bits are multiplicative, so let's just say they're additive. Give you an extra 30% damage, and then you're at 31.85. So you're one-shotting all the common in the game, even if you don't have any stamina. 0 stam. That makes so much of what the melee people have to deal with a breeze. And then if you're sitting here like, oh god, what about the volatile ridden? The whole thing with the hatchet swinging over the top is that you're going to hit them in the head. Well, you don't have to hit them in the head anymore. Now you can swing really low like this and try to hit them in the tummy or in their, I mean, I could actually hit legs on a regular ridden. But if you start hitting them really low, you're not going to really have to worry about hitting them in the head. And since the body shots are going to do enough damage, you can sit here, swing like this, start taking things out in front of you, again, even when your stam's out. So if you're sitting there in a position where your stam's in a rough spot, you can't use your combat knife anymore, that's when you would whip out your fire axe and then just keep it up. And Berserker's not only going to increase your damage, it's going to increase your attack speed. So this lower attack speed that we have with low stam is also going to become irrelevant. Berserker does a lot of crazy things, and I really fell off of it for a while, and I shouldn't have. So what ends up happening is if you have a combat knife on, you can sit here and stab, 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 stab with a really high efficiency weapon, right? Low stamina requirement, high damage. But if for some reason something goes wrong where your stamina does run low, like let's say you were sprinting and then a horde came in and you're caught out of position, you can stab, 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 and then when you run out of your ability to stab, 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 you can be like, okay, well, time to start swinging the big boy here, and you can maintain your presence and not get pushed back or get surrounded or get taken over. And I guess, and now that I think about this, something we haven't talked about yet is punching. So something to know about punching. 10 stamina. It's also really effective at creating a cone of safety around you, because if you punch one ridden like this or like this, what that does is it pushes all the other ridden away and they run into each other, they stumble across each other. So punching is a really big deal in this game, and if you're not playing melee and you're punching, this is something you really need to get good at in Nightmare. Punching is going to save your life. Somebody who isn't good at punching, I say this all the time, if you're not good at punching, you're not good at Nightmare. So try to practice your punching, try to get good at listening to where ridden are so you can, like, you know, turn and punch to things. And also something to keep in mind with punching is even if you are pretty much out of stam, you can still punch. So keep punching. Another interesting thing to know about punching is, let's say I have a gun here, I shoot it, and again, this is in the tooltip. Some people think this is an exploit. This is something that the game encourages you to do. Is, let's say I gotta reload. Well, I can start reloading and then keep punching, and then what you'll see is my gun's reloaded. You can be reloading while you're punching. It's an intended feature of the game. Again, it's in the tooltips. So this has been a lot of why do things work the way they do and a lot of mechanisms. So now I think that you got a lot of that understood. I think we can start tearing through this deck a little bit. So why are we picking some of these cards? Well, Face Your Fears, it gives you that 2 temporary health. And temporary health is a really big deal in this game. In case you don't understand how temporary health works, let me try to give you a good idea. So I'm sitting here burning myself alive here. For the purpose of your education. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at these pills here, what they're going to do is they're going to give me a bunch of temporary health. And you're going to see in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, my health is going to turn blue. And over time, assuming that this isn't considered a safe room, yeah, my health is going to decay. That's how temporary health works. That's the word, temporary. And what you might have noticed is it covered all the red health I had, but it also went ahead and covered up some of the trauma I had, which is a really big deal. So, things to know about temporary health and why it's such a huge deal for melee players. So what temporary health does is it shields you from trauma damage. So if I have 30 temporary health and I take 10 damage, well, typically that 10 damage would make it so I maintain a little bit of permanent damage, aka trauma. But if it comes out of your temporary health, you can ignore it. It doesn't add more trauma to your character. All right, that's why Amped Up partially is so OP right now, is because of temporary health. Temporary health is your shield from trauma damage. That is by far its most lucrative feature. You just reduce the amount of trauma you accumulate. And like you just saw before, it can heal you beyond your trauma threshold. So as you can see right now, my max health is 88. But when I use those pills, I went back up to 100 health. So in the land of melee, where your job is to basically grind out a lot of ridden and kill a lot of ridden, if you're getting 2 temporary health per ridden kill, you can very quickly just keep remaxing out your health with Face Your Fears, because you're going to generate more temp health than you lose over time. On top of the fact, again, that it protects you from trauma damage. Not to mention, temporary health is also kind of bugged in a way with how trauma damage works. I could get more into that, but basically it's more effective than it should be. 1 temporary health is going to protect you from all your trauma damage. Even if you only had 10 temporary health and you take like 40 damage, it's going to protect you the same way as if you only took 5 damage but you had 10 temporary health. It's this crazy shield that works way better than it's supposed to. Let's go through the rest of the deck. We talked about spiky bits a bit. Gives you damage resistance and also melee damage. Now, damage resistance is a huge part of every melee person's kit. You can see a meth head here reduces our ability to aim down sights. Well, on the topic of damage resistance here, we're going to pick another damage resistance card that does the same thing, reduces your ability to aim down sights. But if we go ahead and take a look at Holly here, very quickly, we're at a point where Holly, again, starts with 10% damage resistance, which is super cool. And then if you go ahead and take these just two cards right away, we're at a position where we have 10% from Holly, 10% from Spiky Bits, 15 from Motorcycle Helmet. We're at 35% damage resistance. So a third of the damage you would typically be taking, suddenly you're not taking that anymore. And that damage reduction synergizes really well with Scar Tissue. Scar Tissue is, in my mind, a must pick for a melee player, and I always forget about it when I'm sitting here building these dang decks. So what Scar Tissue does is it reduces the damage taken from all ridden by 1. And you might think, well, okay, who cares? If I get smacked by a tall boy and he does 40 damage, what's 1 health going to do for me? I'd rather have the damage resistance. Where Scar Tissue gets really helpful, and where it actually synergizes really well with damage resistance, is in the situations of like a Charred or a Blighted Ridden. Because Blighted do damage over time. And then same with the Charred. What Scar Tissue does is, I believe, helps reduce that tick damage. So if you are making the tick damage reduced simply by damage resistance, you're making your Scar Tissue more effective. Because let's say you have 10 tick damage per tick. Well, if you have Scar Tissue and you reduce by 1, well, suddenly that's like 10% effectiveness. But if your damage resistance brings that tick damage down to 5, and then suddenly Scar Tissue brings it down by another 1, then your Scar Tissue is 20% effective. You see how it gets better the more damage resistance you have? So Scar Tissue is such a protector against things like Blighted and Charred. If you don't have Scar Tissue in your deck, I swear you're going to wish you did. Now on through the rest of the deck here. Cross Trainers. This adds Stamina and Stamina Regen, Move Speed, and Health. All of these are good things for a melee character. Stamina Regen, if you run out of stamina, just have more stam. Move speed so you can move around a little bit better. I don't think I have to explain it too much more than that. Surplus pouches I have in the deck because one of the shortfallings, or shortcomings I should say, of melee is Reekers. If they get too close to you, you're in trouble. And I mean, frankly, all the mutations can be kind of a problem for a melee character if they get in your face the right way. So by having surplus pouches, not only do you give yourself another pocket, you also help out the rest of the team. And really, this is just going to help you carry another thing like a grenade or a flashbang to help deal with Reekers if you're out of position and your team can't help you. You don't want to sit there and go stabbing a Reeker, because if you stab the Reeker and he explodes on you, then you call in another horde, which is hurting your team. You don't want that. Through the rest of the deck, you have Vanguard, very similar energy to Face Your Fears, except what it also does is helps your teammates, if they're within a certain radius of you, also get temporary health. On the topic of temporary health, we have Numb, which gives you more damage resistance. So now we're at, what, like 50% damage resistance? And then Hunker Down also gives you more damage resistance. And from here on out, I think we can change things up based on how you want to play. So we have Batter Up, Mugger, and Ignore the Pain. So Batter Up, just more melee damage. Honestly, again, this is a playstyle thing. If you want to have more melee damage so you can maybe try to take out more mutations, you go ahead and do so. Same thing, Ignore the Pain. This will give you more melee damage against mutations if it's something you're into. This can also be good against like a boss's weak spot or something like that. And then we also have Mugger here at the end, which will help give you more ammo and more razor wire for the team, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun proccing razor wire. But these 3 cards, again, are something that you can really change up to maybe fit the playstyle of the act. So let's say you're in a situation like in Act 1, where use speed becomes really, really, really valuable. You might want to put use speed at the end of your deck. So you might want to throw in, I don't know, a headband magnifier or a multi-tool or a screwdriver just to be that person on your team that provides a lot of extra use speed to help load up the howitzer at the end. Or let's say you are in Act 2 and you need to go ahead and put the crates together on grave danger. Pretty much if you know the act and you know if use speed is going to be useful, you could consider doing that. You could also do some money cards and put those earlier in the deck, like utility scab or something like that. That's easily the best economy card in the game right now is utility scab. I really encourage you to play around with your deck. And also another thing I want to make clear, and I probably should have made this clear earlier, is this does not have to be taken in order. I encourage you, pick things as you need them. The only card that is going to be guaranteed is your first card. But then after that, what, you have 5 cards displayed? So pick what you feel like you need. You don't have to go Meth Head and then Berserker and then Face Your Fears and then Spiky Bits and then Motor. Change it up as you need it. I have these kind of generally placed based off of where I might want them. But this is not set in stone, and I really encourage you not to play like it's set in stone. Pick things as you need them, okay? Not in order. Marathon Runner could be really good too because it lets you backpedal really well and go to the side really well, which could be really useful if you're trying to dodge tall boys on a doorway. Pep Talk could be a lot of fun because you have a ton of damage resistance as it is, and then if you go to pick up a teammate, you have this innate damage resistance, which makes reviving people a lot of fun. Right when this rework first came out, we were actually doing invincible things where we would have a lot of damage resistance and then I would try to revive while I'm taking a lot of damage, and you're basically invincible even on nightmare mode, which was hilarious. So whatever tickles your fancy. I mean, you could even go more pockets here too, so inventory, right? Pick things that you feel are going to match your playstyle. But really what the whole point of this video was to teach you a lot about how Melee works, some of the mechanics behind it, so you can really get a better understanding. And then hopefully when the new hammer comes out, you can take all these things you learned today and really try to apply them to different scenarios that might arise with the Tunnels of Terror, or again, the hammer, or maybe these new cards that are coming out. I don't know what's all going to be happening on April 12th, but probably a lot of things. I mean, Melee rework is literally on the list of things in the roadmap. So I hope this taught you a lot. We stream just about every single night on twitch.tv/SwingPoynt. Link will be in the description and also the top comments. I encourage you guys to come say hi, ask questions, meet the fam in the community that we have over on Twitch. And if you found this video helpful, or any of the other guides that we have on the channel, we have a ton of them for Back 4 Blood, please consider subscribing down below. And then with that, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video that we do around here.